It's no secret sales of SUVs are booming, but at the same time there's a core group of off-roaders, proper four-wheel drives that are just soldiering on, and that is what we're testing this time round. We've got the all-new Land Rover Discovery, the Trailhawk version of the Jeep Grand Cherokee, a tweaked version of Ford's Everest, and of course the old-time favourite, the Toyota Prado.
Our test bed is the West Australian coast, a vast expanse of sand, rocks and gravel that promises to put these four to the ultimate test. We've chosen the luxury models, and we not only want to know how they pamper on-road, but also how they perform when the going gets rough.
The first thing you notice in the Jeep is the performance. It's got more power than anything here, a bigger engine, 3-litre V6.
There's 184 kilowatts and 570 newton metres driving through an 8-speed automatic. And because it's smaller than the others, it's also lighter, something that also helps the performance.
The throttle response isn't always brilliant, mixed with a tiny bit of turbo lag. It just occasionally takes a while to wind up, but once it's going, it's smooth, refined and punchy. It's the suspension and tyres and off-road ability that really define the Trailhawk. So this car really works nicely in the rough stuff. You've got the Kevlar reinforced tyres, which give you a bit more confidence in firing along on roads like this. Being able to lift the suspension as high as you can is a real advantage when you're talking some tough terrain.
That said, the Grand Cherokee doesn't match the others with wheel articulation, how far the suspension will compress and droop, so it doesn't take much to kick a wheel in the air.
And the all-wheel drive system does a really nice job. You've also got these various modes that you can dial up. Now around here, we've obviously been using the sand mode quite a bit to get up and over the dunes pretty easily. It does a really nice job of apportioning the drive to the wheel that needs it best. Now, of course, the Grand Cherokee is smaller than the other three cars we've got here. It's only 5 seats for starters. You just don't quite have that interior space, but for a lot of people, they're not going to care. You've got a fair bit of space out there, and in some ways it's a more appealing size to a couple, for example.
The Grand Cherokee is also decent value, with the Trailhawk selling for $74,000. For that, you get plenty of kit, including leather and suede inside.
It's also got a sensibly sized fuel tank. You're looking at 93 litres, so you can get some pretty decent range out of it when you're touring in remote areas. The Grand Cherokee's also got a pretty good infotainment system, and you've got plenty of electronics. The customisable dash, for example, is a nice touch, and yeah, lots of features for the money. The Prado is a chunky machine, and you get that the second you step in it, from the steering wheel to the size of it, and that is one of the big appeals. It's a big car, and there's loads of space. But the big win with the Prado is the fuel tank. It's 150 litres, which is massive, so you can comfortably get more than 1,000 kilometres. Even when you're towing or driving off-road, you'll do big Ks before having to stop for fuel. And that is a massive win out here. The engine, it's okay, but it's a 2.8 litre 4-cylinder turbo. It's the least powerful by a fair margin of all the cars we've got here. It's all about torque, obviously, but even then, it's okay rather than being special.
As for the raw numbers, you're looking at 130 kilowatts and 450 newton metres, mated to a 6-speed automatic.
Off-road, the Prado's a weapon, but you've got to familiarise yourself with what is a fairly ordinary control system here inside. You've got to select low range to get modes like sand mode, for example. It's a bit disappointing you can't get that in high range. You've got to muck around with a dial that just seems nonsensical when you first look at it, and press a few buttons to get things happening. So you need to understand what's going on in there. Once you get it sorted, this thing will go almost anywhere. Now the Prado has a rear diff lock, but it's also got a centre diff lock. So that's a real win when things start getting pretty sticky.
We're talking almost $86,000. Thankfully, it does come generously appointed with things such as a screen in the rear to keep the kids entertained.
But whether you're on-road or off-road, it's pretty clear the Prado's about comfort and doing things in a cruisy manner rather than pace. Everything's a bit sloppy and wobbly, but the advantage of that is that it somehow feels fairly natural on roads like this. It just ambles along. It is not cheap though, especially once you get to this Kakadu model that we're driving. The Everest tends to impress the longer you've been in it. It's a fairly basic setup in terms of coil springs, Non-adjustable suspension, it's the only car here that you can't adjust the suspension on in some form. 5-cylinder turbo diesel engine, very familiar engine obviously out of the Ranger. The engine is a very stout performer. It's got grunt almost instantly, really nice throttle response, a little bit noisy. It's not exactly the most refined thing around, but it does a decent job for what you're trying to achieve out here.
All up, there's 143 kilowatts of power, and while it's not overloaded with torque, there's still a decent 470 newton meters, and it arrives quite low in the rev range.
Inside, the Everest doesn't feel quite as big as the Prado, but it's a decent sized truck. You can certainly bowl plenty of people in there. Where the Everest really surprises is in what they've done with that suspension tune. It's got really nice body control, so whether it's trying to work slowly or go through sand dunes and proper off-roading stuff, or whether you're cruising along a little bit quicker along roads like this where you've got some undulations and bumps in there, it just does a really nice job of settling the whole thing and giving you confidence and also a fair degree of comfort. But the big change with this car we're in is the tyres and suspension. You can now get the titanium, this top of the range one, with the smaller tyres, which works better out here. You're less chance of getting a puncture. And the car still drives nicely. You lose a little bit of that steering accuracy on the road, but off-road, it's a big win. You certainly get more compliance in the tyres. For this sand driving that we've been doing, it's a win being able to let a bit of air out of the tyres and let them work better on the sand. One issue with the Everest is the size of the fuel tank.
It's only 80 litres and the engine isn't particularly frugal, so in places like this you're going to need to refuel every 500 k's or less.
Everything about the Discovery is more, the most obvious of which are more money and more luxury. You get in this thing and instantly it's next level. This car is a real sense of occasion, from all the trims and materials and the presentation to the way it drives. It is a supremely comfortable machine. And even once the going gets a little bit rough, it's still got that comfort factor. It's also borderline sports car, at least as much as a 2+ tonne four-wheel drive can be. The steering's quite sharp. It feels really nicely controlled and it just does a really good job. You can see yourself whiling away the miles, no problems in this thing. There are also little hints of clever pretty much everywhere you look, from the centre console that's got storage behind it to the four-wheel drive system and just the way everything works. It's a clever car.
It's also a weapon off-road. Like the Jeep, it has independent suspension front and rear, but it has far better articulation, a product of the ground-up development that is focused on raw ability. The Disco can ford through 900mm of water, and it has a towering 283mm of ground clearance once you pop that suspension to its highest level. Combined with an intelligent four-wheel drive system, it makes for easy going in challenging conditions.
One of the big changes with this Disco, aside from the design, which has got more curves and sweeps than ever before, is the engine. So it's the return of a 4-cylinder engine. You can get a choice of 2 diesels. We've got the more powerful one, the SD4, so you're looking at 177 kilowatts, and it goes quite nicely. Part of it is the transmission. It's hooked up to an 8-speed automatic, and it's a pretty clever tranny. But the further you head off-road or outback, the more you feel you're just stepping a bit outside the comfort zone of the Discovery. It feels like it's more full luxury in the suburbs. Don't get me wrong, it is extremely capable, but things like the 20-inch tyres, they're not ideal for this sort of thing. You don't have that thicker sidewall that really works in off-roading. That said, they're doing a great job so far.
And they continue to do a terrific job the harder we punish them.
One tiny thing, if you get stuck, and we did manage to get stuck in the soft sand, the tow recovery point at the front, you've actually got to take a piece of the car off just to access it, so not ideal.
As for the price, the Disco is by far the most expensive here. This HSE SD4 model we're testing is almost 97 grand, and for that you still have to spend more on things that really should be standard. Stuff like blind spot warning or heated seats. But not enough to stop the Discovery from taking the win in this four-way shootout. With a luxurious and functional body, punchy and fuel-efficient engine, and superb off-road credentials, it justifies its price premium nicely. The Toyota Prado, it's a fine runner-up. As well as its huge 150-litre tank, it's the sort of car that doesn't mind getting its tyres dirty. The Ford and the Jeep, well, they each have appeal for very different reasons, but each is ultimately outclassed this time around.